Everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from the National Interest. This is dated November 28th. I know it was a little bit ago from the time that this is coming out, but I was on vacation, so we're doing it right now. Not cutting that out. The article is called Anti-Semitism, Anti-Zionism, and the War on Hamas. It says, though often distinguished conceptually, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are synonymous. So let's just, excuse me, dive right into it. It says, we hear it so often that it sounds routine. I am not an anti Semite, I am an anti Zionist. The occasional anti Semite confesses with astonishing candor. Such openness reveals the speaker's ignorance about their own racism, a prejudice lodged in their unconscious, though quite close to the surface. Or they do know it, and the decursive alibi is meant to hide it. I feel like I can't read right now. I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that. All right. Oh, ads just kept doing that. Anyway, let's go down here. It says it is not coincidental. Jihadist fundamentalists use the term Zionist as a disqualification towards Israelis and Jews in general. It is always a Zionist aggressor, the Zionist invader, the Zionist occupier, Zionist or not, since, in the strict sense of the term, not all Jews are Zionists. The real problem they have is the Jews, and this is the name of the debate of our times yet again. And yet again, the debate of our times is, can Jason actually read an article? So Zionism is a political movement that emerged at the end of the 19th century. It is based on the notion that the Jewish people, a nation in an ancient diaspora, are worthy of their political and legal home, namely their own state. As such, it is a nationalist ideology, a nationalism that the metaphor extended family has perfectly captured since the writings of the great Benedict Anderson, hence the search for a home. The Zionist movement became a political community in the diaspora. Religious and secular Zionists, conservatives and Marxists, revisionists and reformists, progressives and liberals, among others, a pluralism that has been maintained ever since. All of them, in turn, were permeated by dominant intellectual currents of the time, the Enlightenment and rationalism in particular, and all in the search for citizen rights that only their own state could guarantee for them. And in the place of origin, before the creation of the Zionist movement, the Jewish presence in what is now Israel has been documented since immemorial times, a biblical truism that is often forgotten or deliberately ignored. Many ancient archaeological sites confirm this. Yeah, I mean, there's archaeological evidence of Jews being there in the area of Israel for thousands upon thousands of years. I mean, predating like the Roman Empire, or not even just the Roman Empire, but the Roman Republic and the Roman Kingdom. And so going back and back and back and back. Okay. And you'll notice at that point that most of that stuff was happening. There wasn't anything called Palestine. There wasn't anything called Islam. As a matter of fact, there wasn't even Christianity. So, yes, we've been there way before everybody else. Says Jewish immigration, in turn, was also relevant long before the creation of the Zionist movement. This is the case in the 15th century for Spanish Jews and the 16th century for Portuguese Jews expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. In the 17th century, Lithuanian and Ukrainian Jews fled pogroms. In the 19th century, many escaped pogroms in Poland, Russia, and Ukraine. And in the 20th century, Soviet Jews fled totalitarianism. The kibbutz movement, in turn, dates back to 1910, a random sample to illustrate that Jewish presence in and immigration to Palestine was never interrupted. Thus, the argument of the Jew as a colonizer is baseless. You can't colonize your own home, can you? And it's not about who arrived first, nor who is truly originally from there. There is no such truly. There is no objective beginning of time. Where the line is drawn is subjective. Primordialism is always a la carte. The idea that Palestinians are native and Jews are transplanted does not stand up to the slightest empirical test. That's correct. I'm glad somebody said it. This nativism is almost always insidious, inevitably retrograde, and in the case of Israel, erroneous. Hence, the narrative about the Palestinian struggle as decolonization is nothing more than that, a narrative. To also portray Hamas and its despotic rule as the vanguard of that struggle is humiliating to the Palestinians themselves, the main victims of Hamas. That's true too. Says thus, the state of Israel was created in 1948 as a result of the partition of Palestine. In any case, the colonial power was Great Britain, just as during World War I it had been the Ottoman Empire. It was partition followed by a war, often the sequence of such processes, since reconfiguring the map may well cost blood. At the same time, it tends to be simultaneously the cause and effect of deep and persistent ethnic conflicts. Take some examples of the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the subsequent partitions in several of the states in Eastern and Central Europe. In Czechoslovakia, it was negotiated and peaceful, the Velvet Divorce. In the Soviet Union, however, 15 new states arose from one, and it was hardly conflict-proof. Ukraine, for example, still pays the price of Russia's official doctrine rejecting the existence of Ukraine as an independent state and the Ukrainians as a separate people and nation. Thus, some of the crimes of the Russian occupying forces, such as sexual violence and the kidnapping and deportation of children, fall within the realm of ethnic cleansing. The partition of Yugoslavia led to a civil war with crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing as well, especially in Bosnia and then in Kosovo, predominantly Muslim societies, it should be noted. To question the existence of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, established in 1992, and the state of Kosovo, created in 2008, would imply denying the right to existence of the Bosnians and the Kosovars, respectively, the nations whose political and legal home is constituted in said states. Plain and simple, this is genocide, which is exactly what happened in that war. Anti-Zionism expresses a similar racism, as it challenges the right of a people to have their own state, for which it is necessary to dissolve their identity, the Jewish identity. As an intellectual operation, this also implies ignoring reality, that is, denying the existence of what has existed for 75 years, the State of Israel, or worse, proposing its elimination. Western sympathizers of Hamas do exactly that when they repeat, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, the river being the Jordan River and the sea being the Mediterranean, as they associate themselves with the project of obliteration of what remains in between, the State of Israel. This necessarily implies the extermination of its population, a genocidal project whose most explicit notice, but not the first, is dated October 7th, 2023. Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are synonyms. Take the kidnapping, torture, and beheading of babies and the rape of women as a statistical sampling of ethnic cleansing in the Hamas version, not unlike what happened in Bosnia and continues to happen in Ukraine under Russian occupation. The thesis of Hamas as a liberation movement, in turn, has been particularly astute in the Americas. Transformed into some kind of dependency theory and narrated in superficial Marxist jargon, this form of anti Semitism has fused today's left with the neo fascist right of the past. For the West, this is even more dangerous and more destructive. Based on arguments around the notion of liberation of Palestine, the government of Bolivia broke diplomatic relations with Israel, and the governments of Chile and Colombia rushed to call their respective ambassadors for consultation without having expressed much condemnation of the attack on October 7th. 70 Latin American citizens were killed on October 7th, and around 31 Latin American citizens were taken hostage. It is not clear that recovering them is a priority. Doesn't seem like that at all, actually. And hell, I didn't even know that there were that many that were taken, or any Latin American citizens at all. The greater moral clarity is seen among the European left, though acknowledging that social democracy in its different versions has begun to reflect on its failed social experiment or social engineering experiment of the last quarter century, a multiculturalism that recognizes identity rights and legitimizes them at the expense of the universal rights of the liberal state. The consequence has been a fractionalization and segmentation of citizenship, and therefore a loss of authority in that same state. This is a recipe for a flagrant double standard. Muslim communities in Europe enjoy the freedom and protections granted to them by liberal constitutionalism, but at the same time, many of them refuse to recognize those same rights for others, for example, the right to blasphemy. The cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo and the writer Salman Rushdie, among others, have paid with their lives or physical integrity. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I started reading that sentence. Or these exact examples right here. So it says, meanwhile, the supposed and self-identified or self-defined leftists marched through Western capitals denouncing the genocide committed by Israel, quite ironically. By sending combat units to massacre Israeli civilians, Hamas issued a declaration of war. Israel acted accordingly, using its right to self-defense specified in the United Nations Charter. Undoubtedly, it must minimize civilian casualties, but that is difficult in any war, and certainly impossible in a war against Hamas. The international press has documented for years that its command centers operate in civilian facilities, for example, in the basement of Al Shifa Hospital. This could also make it a legitimate target under international law and the Geneva Convention itself, and I believe I've seen that it actually does make it a legitimate target. But again, don't quote me on that. I'm not an expert in those things, but I have seen them. So tragically, the proportional response issue turns out to be a null question. That is the worst misfortune of wars. This is why the international system must forcefully punish those who start these wars. This conflict exhibits a more sophisticated logic than the usual terrorist operation. Turns out that it is not Hamas that makes the fundamental decisions, and with this war, the West will move further and further away from the Muslim world, and the reestablishment of diplomatic relations of Israel with its neighbors, especially the Saudis, and the recognition of the state of Israel throughout the Arab world will be farther away. The Abraham Accords will be a nostalgic and unfulfilled promise, precisely the outcome Tehran has sought. The mullahs also plan the repercussions of the war, not only as anti-Zionism, but also as open anti-Semitism. already. Anti-Semitic vandalism is on the rise. Parisian buildings are marked with Stars of David. Montreal synagogues are firebombed. Jewish graves in Managua are desecrated. And go figure, swastikas are painted in Jewish community centers everywhere. And here you see there's links to all of these things here. If you don't believe what this writer is saying, well, there's the evidence right there. Go ahead and click on those links. Second page. Says a social media account posted a map of Manhattan with markers locating a few dozen Jewish institutions and firms with the heading Globalized Intifada, Zone of Direct Actions. Is all this sound and fury directed against Israel or against Jews? These are a few examples among hundreds of cases that underline that, as stated above, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are synonyms. And yeah, they say it's against Israel, the fury, but it is against Jews. Okay, so they'll say one thing and explicitly do the other. Says barely 2 months have passed since the attack on October 7th, a date that will be a milestone in our history. In this brief period, Jewish communities have begun to breathe the stench of the past, the terror of what they already experienced, a kind of deja vu of the Holocaust. I wrote this piece on the night of November 9th, 2023. The date evokes another November 9th, but in 1938, Kristallnacht. Some feel they are living what they read and were told about the 1930s and after. The most terrible thing about 2023 is that the trains and furnaces, institutionalized in precise procedural rules, were more predictable than Hamas. It is not trivial to remember it, nor is it superfluous for all of us to remain alert. So that's actually a really good article. I hadn't read it before right now, so I definitely agree with that. What everything that was said in here. So let me know what you guys think about this. Do you agree that anti-Semitism is in fact anti-Zionism? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.